Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, and I've been your host for about 400 years, and I hope you've been watching for all of that time. Around this time of year, we take a very original note and do a show about the holidays, and this year will be no exception. I have a group of people here who are spiritual leaders and activists in our community. I'm sure you know that Get Used to It has concentrated over the years on issues of particular interest to the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender community, but we find that we have a lot of allies that watch the show as well. So we're going to be a little free-ranging in our discussion today because the holidays are particularly personal. Everybody sort of has a different take, and of course every year it's different for each of us. Some conflict, some happiness, some sadness, some we don't even know why we feel what we feel. Some hunger for spirituality, maybe, some new kind of celebration, maybe new family. So we'll talk about all of these things today. Very pleased to have as my guests, first the Rabbi Denise Eger, who's been on the show before. She is the spiritual leader of Congregation Kuehl here in West Hollywood. Welcome, Denise.
Glad to be here. Happy holidays.
And also my friend Phill Wilson, who is the Director of African American AIDS Policy and Training Institute here in Los Angeles. Welcome, Phill.
Thank you. It's
glad
good
to have
here.
you back.
Great.
And for her first appearance on the show, the Reverend Nancy Wilson, who is the pastor of the Metropolitan Community Church here in Los Angeles.
Yes.
Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. All right.
Glad to have you here.
Good to be here.
Well, Denise, let's start with you. Here we are again. We've talked other years, I think, about this holiday season. And particularly for our community, the gay and lesbian community, whether there are any sort of differences or whether you notice any trends of, I don't know, hankering for, spirituality or a new ritual. But this year we have a particular addition, I think, to our consideration about celebration, not just as gays and lesbians, and that is this confluence of the holidays coming practically one on top of the other. What is that experience going to be like for you?
Well, yeah, it's true this year, Sheila, that Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa all overlap, as does Ramadan, which started early, the end of November, and continues a month long. So you have many of these holidays celebrating at the same time, at the same season. I think for some people, especially those who have families who come from many different traditions, interfaith families, I think it's comforting for them in many ways to be able to have celebrations together. For others of us, it's a more difficult season because even though we share many of the same messages about peace and kindness and love and family and celebration and spirituality, I think it's often difficult when the holidays overlap because there's a sense of everything kind of gets mushed together, if you will, in one big stew, and it's sometimes hard to kind of create your own space for the holiday.
Seeing all those windows dressed in red and green doesn't help you too much around Hanukkah.
Well, no, it doesn't. One of my favorite stories is that one year, I guess I was away at school, and my folks sent me a Hanukkah card, except it was a red and green Hanukkah card, missing you across the miles, kind of thing. Clearly, whoever was the card maker didn't quite get that, those have associations that aren't necessarily for Hanukkah.
Well, it must make it more difficult. I mean, I thought you said it was comforting in a way because everybody's sort of celebrating their holidays at the same time, and if we're going to be jolly at one time of the year, God knows we better do it right now. Right. But those interfaith couples or families, of which we, in addition to the fact that we may have our own gay and lesbian family, within that family we may have different traditions. Are we torn more in terms of where and how to do this, or what do we do anyway?
I think those are always the challenges in families that share multiple spiritual traditions together, or interfaith families, there's always a pull of how are we going to do this, how are we going to decide how to do it, what feels right for our family, what community are we going to be a part of, are we going to be part of multiple religious communities? So I think those are big questions that when families come together that they have to make some decisions about. It doesn't have to be a painful decision, but it does take some compromise between partners, between sides of families. It's not just between spouses that happens, but the larger family circle as well.
But at least in most families, although I don't know how serious the sort of religious divide may be, and especially any new immigrant community might bring more serious sort of religious divide. Ours is a little more polite, but probably not any less serious, I guess, in America. But in addition to that, you could almost always think, well, maybe at least the daughter-in-law will be welcome, in the house. But in our couples, do we have sort of an added sort of concern?
Well, I think the holidays, as fun as they can be and as joyous as they can be, I think they're often difficult in our GLBT queer community because it does bring up a lot of those family strife issues. I mean, holidays are hard anyways. They bring back all those childhood memories, some of all which are not so wonderful. And in our own community, there are many of us who are not welcome back in those families of origin. So we have to create new families, new traditions, our own way of owning, Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever the holiday. But I also think that, in particular, when we're partnered, that sometimes we have a tendency not to see our own family as kind of the core family. And so we're forced kind of to go back to that family of origin, and there's always the question, will my spouse be welcomed? Can I bring them to the Christmas table? Can I bring them to the latke party? And how will that be received?
Not to mention, we try to create some traditions for our kids, and create a new kind of holiday where we're all together.
Right.
And then we think, I mean, as a family sort of grow up and the parents are then the grandparents, there's this sort of tradition, not always, that the grandparents then start coming, to your house. That's where the kids are, that's where the mess can be, etc. But if they won't come.
Yeah, sometimes that's really difficult and really painful. I like to think that the holidays can be an opportunity in these particular moments for reconciliation, not just based on the distance, but that somehow that perhaps the holiday might be the opportunity to say, look, it's Christmas. We don't have to make political statements. Let's just learn to be together. And that might be an opening for many families as opposed to a wall to keep them apart.
How do you help people in a congregation, Kuehl and me, with these issues?
Well, I think a lot of it is sharing with one another and talking with one another about how we handle these issues. Sheila, this year our congregation started a religious school for our kids. We had so many kids in gay and lesbian families that we needed to provide for our children's religious education. And one of the wonderful parts has been that on Sunday mornings, while the children are in their classes, the parents really sit around and are able to talk about what it means to be gay parents. I mean, it doesn't mean our kids are gay, but it means sharing what happens, how we deal with school issues, how we deal with just parenting, general issues having nothing to do with being gay or lesbian. But this has become a wonderful support network for one another and trying to deal exactly with some of these. What are you going to do this year for the holidays? Are you going to invite your family? You're going away? What are you doing? And some families actually go away during the holidays to kind of avoid some of those family situations. Well, others of us are very lucky and very blessed and don't have that painful holiday dilemma and have created new and wonderful celebrations, not only with our families of choice and our children, but our families of origin, and they're very much woven in apart together.
Well, I don't think it's just lucky. I mean, obviously, if you have parents that are not just saying, that's it, you're out of my life, which, about which you can do nothing, it still, it takes work. I mean, I'm intrigued by the notion of the parents' discussion, because I often think that being part of a minority community has turned out to be a great blessing, because we have the excuse to get together and talk. We don't just talk about our oppression, but we do have a different experience in life than our straight brothers and sisters. And there's nowhere for them to go and talk, nor do they really choose necessarily to do so. So it can be very helpful. I found that in my family, for instance, none of us ever talked about the fact that we couldn't understand why we felt so sad around the holidays. It wasn't based on anything sad. We were happy to be together. But there's this sort of sticky, sad feeling. And sometimes I thought it was, well, maybe I'm not having a good enough time, or I'm not as happy as I thought I was going to be. You know, those sort of basic things.
Right.
We didn't talk about that at all. But in the community, we talk about it because we think maybe it's related to being gay.
Yes, right. And so we try to kind of flesh it out about, well, what's going on here? Why am I having these feelings? Or it doesn't live up to the expectations that I thought it had. And that's been, I think, a real comfort to a bunch of us who have children and who, you know, kind of struggle with just general parenting issues. And I think especially dealing for those families that deal in the interfaith family realm, you know, how do you talk to your child when one parent's one religion and another parent's another religion, and how do you make that so that you're not pitting the child against the parent who doesn't share the same tradition, but, you know, how do you help that family honor one another in a very loving spirit? And I think those are kind of really important things to discuss and not just sweep under the rug.
Right.
And a lot of times I think what happens, especially, I think this is true whether gay or straight, I mean, regardless, is that we don't talk about those religious differences. So that when people fall in love and they want to make a family with one another, they tend to see whether they have the same values in common, and if they share a different religious tradition, they often don't talk about them. Right. And they just kind of brush over them. And then when the holidays come around, like this year especially, when they're all overlapped, boy, then you're in a situation where you better figure it out, because otherwise it can bring up a lot of those feelings. So that's why I always try and talk to couples, gay or straight, to, you know, you got to face these religious differences, these spiritual differences. They don't have to be a break for your marriage. They don't have to break you up, but you have to come to some kind of accommodation about what's authentic and what feels right, and how are you going to go about celebrating this? Is a Christmas tree going to be helpful? Are you going to, where's the place for the Kwanzaa Kenora? I mean, where's that going to be in the house, and how that works? And so I think those are some really important issues that have to be discussed and have to be talked about in a loving manner. They don't have to be World War III, but I think they have to be dealt openly with.
Very true. Well, Phill, I think the first Kwanzaa party I ever went to was at your house, and for years it was, you know, the Kwanzaa celebration for many of us in the community. When did you decide to incorporate Kwanzaa into your celebration, and why was that?
Well, the Kwanzaa party you're talking about has been going on for 16 years now, so this will be, I think, the 17th time that I've done it. I don't really know why, to tell you the truth. You know, I was interested in Kwanzaa, and I've always been interested in figuring out how to make myself whole, you know, and that's what Kwanzaa represented for me. It represented, you know, just another piece of the puzzle of who I am. And so I started doing the Kwanzaa party to kind of bring together all of the various communities that I belong to. And I think that often when you're a part of, you know, a minority community, and being a black gay man, being black and being gay and all of that kind of, and then eventually, a person living with HIV, all of that made me have these compartmentalized communities of which I am a part, and figuring out a way to bring them together. And that's what Kwanzaa represented for me, you know, a way to bring all those pieces together. And since Kwanzaa is so much about community, you know, and responsibility and accountability and bringing folks together, it just really worked for me.
Has it changed for you over the years in terms of how you celebrate or how you feel about it?
It certainly has changed over the years. You know, I mean, at this point in my life, we celebrate Kwanzaa and we celebrate Christmas and we celebrate Hanukkah, and you know, and so kind of looking at it with all of the affinities that I have for people in my life. At this point in my life, because now I have a family and I have 2 children, now Kwanzaa actually has become even more important. Now it's interesting, before the show began, that the discussion that we're having was about children, and I find that certainly is often a discussion that I have. And 2 years ago, we went to Israel actually for Christmas and New Year's, and we spent Christmas and New Year's in Jerusalem. And Corey, my youngest, said really a remarkable thing after we were in Jerusalem for about 5 days. And he says, I wish we had not come here. And so we stopped. And we were like walking on the roofs, actually. It was the day we were walking on the roofs. And so I wish we had not come here. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, before I came here, I knew what I believed. And now I'm not so sure. And so the kind of presence of Ramadan and Christianity and Judaism, and even within Christianity, because we went to where the Catholics think that Christ was crucified, and we went to where the Protestants think that Christ was crucified, and the notion of the Wailing Wall and the Temple on the Mount, that relationship between the two of them, and there was tension going on then that well, as often is in that part of the world this time of year. And he said, I knew what I believed and now I don't. And so we had an opportunity to have a discussion about what faith means and what it's about, and talking about, well, it's called faith. It's not called no. And how you get at that place and how it's okay to analyze, and how in fact it's an affirmation of your faith to not be true, not to be sure. It's not actually, it doesn't diminish your faith to not be sure.
Well, you've always brought, in my opinion, a real spiritual quality. These words are too small, but I've seen you speak so many times, and it's interesting to me because in times past you would have identified yourself as a gay activist, and yet now I think, we had this discussion a couple of days ago that activism is a much broader issue, and I was thinking about it when you were talking about faith, because it's not a religious belief to be an activist, but there is a fervency to it. There is a sort of an elemental passion to it that's very similar. We're not worshiping our notion of our community, but the passion that we brought to it. Yet your work is no less passionate, but it's broader. Do you feel that you've changed, sort of? This is also a sort of a summing up time of year,
Well, I think that at this point in my life, I find that, the part of me, or my gayness, has almost nothing to do with explicit discussions around traditional, if we can call anything gay, traditional, anything about the normal constructs of gayness. And one of the things that you said, the last time we spoke, that it actually is true. I find that anything becomes gay by virtue of my presence, and so, to the degree that I engage in gay activism these days, it happens by my presence, and although very little of my time these days are involve traditional gay politics or issues that are movement issues. A lot of my work these days is really about being a parent and really about being a part of my community and really about my faith, and how that allows me to be comfortable in my skin and allows me to know that I belong wherever I am. And so I take it with me when I'm at a school board meeting, or I'm at a PTA meeting, or I'm doing any of the things that I do in my day-to-day life.
Well, it's sort of, I see it, there's a connection here to me, because we were talking about how people have incorporated their own notions of spirituality, partly because they couldn't be comfortable in the church or the synagogue where they grew up, and so we had to figure something else out. But MCC is a very different place. Yes. And yet, in its own way, it ran the risk of being an enclave. There's a haven, and then there's a harbor, and then there's an enclave, and then there's a ghetto. And we have sort of fought our way through and around these places. MCC doesn't feel like a ghetto, but it could run the risk. Tell us a little bit about how it felt to you. You've been pastor there for
15 years.
Quite a while, Nancy.
Yeah. Yes.
How it felt to you in terms of the reason, sort of the raison d'etre of MCC and whether it's worked.
Yes, I think MCC certainly started as this the place where gay and lesbian people primarily first claimed spirituality for ourselves and said we can do this with our own hands and in our own homes and in our own institutions, and we don't need to be legitimized by any other group to do this. We can make spirit ourselves, and we can literally, it is about saving the lives and the I think the spirit of our community, and that work for justice and for spiritual wholeness was always connected deeply in the heart of the community. I think now MCC lives in a much more pluralistic environment religiously or spiritually. At one time, MCC, particularly MCC Los Angeles, was it. And it helped give birth to other institutions and religious institutions. And now we live in a very pluralistic, wonderful, amazing world in Los Angeles and in the world. But I think we still have that market, if you could call it that, for people who are being spiritually wounded by the church. I mean, most of our members come from churches. 40% are former Roman Catholics in MCC. The 40% are probably from evangelical Protestants or fundamentalist backgrounds or holiness churches that still continue to be very oppressive. Maybe 20% from no church background at all. And so we really reach out to people who've been spiritually wounded and need to work through that and heal and come to a new sense of an adult, progressive, religious space, but also people who have no religious background whatsoever, and they're not going to go to a church, a traditional church, or because it seems too far to go, but they'll go to the church where they go to their AA meeting, or where Stonewall Democratic Club meets, or where where they have some other connections in the neighborhood. It feels like it's connected, and they know that this church has a record. I think our celebration of the holidays has changed a great deal in the last 15 years, and I would say in two primary ways. One, I think at first it was survival, how to survive the holidays. We used to put on programs like that. We always had an open house Christmas Day. It felt like an emergency surgery. We were a MASH unit. We were there, holding people's hands through as their lover goes off to be with their parents, or they're in the closet. And there was people were so in the closet then still. It was so terrifying. I think now we have this rolling holiday experience where, because we have a large Latino presence in our church and a Spanish language service, we start with a Feast of Lady of Guadalupe for 8 days, and we have novenas going on in the chapel of our church, which is wonderful, and that goes on, and then we have Christmas and we have Kwanzaa celebration integrated into our church life and celebration, and then the Feast of the Three Kings, and we go to a church in South Central, and our guys go and dress up as the three wise men and bring gifts to kids in a church. We have a partnership with the Catholic Church in South Central, and it's just amazing. We have a wonderful sort of partnership with other groups of churches.
So the three wise men were gay. I always thought
we three queens of Orient, and so because I do think they were gay. Actually, I really think that's a serious issue.
Because they were away from their families at Christmas, and
they didn't bring their wives with them. You don't ever picture them having wives. No. I think they were very gay. They were the only ones who went shopping before they went to see the baby Jesus.
Those gifts.
Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What was it? It was women. It would have been diapers, formula, whatever. But so I think we now have this incredible, I think, kind of sense of variety, and we participate in each other's experiences in a way that was sort of a surprise to us. I think MCC became ecumenical by not by design necessarily, but by experience. Also became more multicultural. I think we struggled with that all the time. How to do that authentically and not just in a kind of a tokenistic or smorgasbord way, but in a really authentic entering into each other's experiences genuinely. And that's the great joy. And I think there's more joy and less survivalism now. And, that there's maybe a greater sense of hope. At the same time, I think the challenge of the holidays is, as a country particularly, we are so addicted and to consumerism. I mean, essentially. I think spiritually, that's the I think the longing and the sadness partly you're talking about is that deep within, many people know, first of all, there's this fantasy of what holidays are supposed to be emotionally, spiritually, and materially. Mm-hmm. Then there are the realities people experience. People go into debt horribly around this time of year. All people's addictions get triggered, drugs, alcohol, sex, anything else, because of this aching, empty hole, I think, in people's lives that they're trying to fill. And so I think that's where we experience the pain, is still in those places in which people have not worked through those deep issues in our lives, and where we have still bought into so much the material philosophy of our culture, and that we aren't facing that, you know, who we are in the rest of the world. I think, and how the rest of the world really views our country and what's really going on here. And so we just sort of do excess and excess and excess, and that's going to make us feel better, but it doesn't.
Well, it's another kind of addiction, as you
Absolutely.
said. But it's interesting to me that commercialism has managed to extend the notion of holiday throughout the year.
If Hallmark can make one other holiday to make a card about,
right,
you
but
know,
we haven't. I mean, I was thinking, when I take my Christmas lights down, which I really don't, I just turn them off. Too much trouble. I feel kind of sorry, and of course every year I leave them up longer, because I really like the feeling of celebration. And as long as my house is lit up, it feels like we're also celebrating. It's a welcoming environment. I think, oh, you know, it's February, but let's have another party. What the heck? You know, the lights are still up.
Valentine's Day's coming. Yes.
And so I wonder if it might be an interesting thing to try to extend our celebration, because we're not making these other holidays, you know, so commercial. Others are. Like Halloween is all about demanding gifts. Now, that's all it's about. And forget about All Hallows Eve or whatever, you know, the celebration of the dead or whatever we could make from it. We don't really do it, or do we? Do we create community around any other time of the year? I mean, in the religious community,
I think the high holidays in our church are Gay Pride, Gay Lesbian Pride. I mean, that becomes a big high point. That carries
nothing
us
else
into
is
July.
going on in June, right?
Right. So, but I mean, I think it is interesting that, I mean, I think there are natural rhythms, whether it's in the seasons or in human community, that you have to have up times and down times. You have to have ordinary time, I think, sometimes for celebration to mean something. I mean, I think you, and sometimes we don't want to let go of that, so we want to have this, you know, we're running at a dead heat, you know, throughout the year, and like, we need times to stop and to say, gee, it's just an ordinary weekend.
Well, I wonder what happens as there becomes an older and older generation of out gays and lesbians. I mean, obviously, you know, gay and lesbian community has always been multi-generational, but I think that there's a group of folks that came out at the same time, and we are getting older over time. And and then you inject into that, now, and I don't know if it's a critical mass yet, but certainly there's a number of us who are now parents, either biological parents or parents by other means. And so the rhythms change as a result of that. Now, when you were talking about, you know, the rhythms and celebrations and what have you, you know, I have to admit that my annual calendar is hooked very much into a school calendar.
That's right. Yeah,
you know, that it rolls around that, and for example, last year a huge battle happened because the school was going to decide, because my boys went to a year-round school, and the school was going to decide to move one of them to a different track than the other one. And it had been a long time since I had gotten so angry, because that totally disrupted our family in really fundamental ways. You know, that made it
They didn't share vacations. It's off time together. It's very difficult.
It's like, oh no, this is not happening. And so that, you know, the reason why I raise that is because I think that in the notion around celebrations and around rhythms, they become broader, and that in fact we become more, our lives become more than just about us. And I think that in the beginning of the movement, so much of this community was really just about us. And fundamental to, I think, a number of us is a much broader spectrum.
And I think that's part of the healing, psychically and spiritually, of the communities, when you move into the sense of being fully empowered as citizens and as part of the citizens of the world and community, is that you have aging parents and you have, you know, and whatever issues you had with them, now they become dependent on you, and you move into different, you have in-laws, you have, you know, extended families, your friends. In our community, our friends are certainly family to us in ways that.
Well, I know the straight community is very happy to see us now suffering from, you know, the sort of same ordinary concerns, and now we can talk to our brothers and sisters, or they can talk to us more, because as you say, the gay community was always, in my opinion, a very normal community. And the only thing that made us different was that we were supposed to be ashamed of who we loved. And now we finally said, I'm not ashamed. Okay, next, what's next? And then they said, well, you can't have any children because you're not, qualified, or you don't do it right, or whatever. And we said, yeah, we can have children. We're going to have children. Now we have children. So what's next? What's next is the sort of ordinary life stuff that sort of gobbles up our lives, but we're still, in our own way, dealing, because our kids still have to deal at school with who we are.
Kids still have to deal at school with, are you going to join the Cub Scout troop, which is the issue that my kid's dealing with, and we're dealing with on our elementary school campus, about what does it mean for our public school to push Cub Scouts in a very diverse setting where we're not the only gay family. I mean, those issues, and as you said, Phill, is being who you are 24 hours a day. It's not you're a parent when you go to school, but you hide your gayness. It's going to school in the fullness of who you are with your kid or at work, and just being, and not being able to hide in selected situations. So instead of the compartmentalization that you talked about, kind of Kwanzaa brings together all the different communities you're part of, it's really also about not compartmentalizing your identities at different times.
Well, also I think about choosing, you're talking about that in terms of Kwanzaa being whole. I remember reading a book years ago called You Can Choose Christmas. It was at least 25 years ago, and I remember that as when I was early times of coming out and struggling with my family then, that the idea that I could create celebration, create holiday, that I could name my own family, that I could create traditions. I know in an MCC, when we do things one year, the next year it's the second annual, we're hungry for those kind of, let's do it, we did it great, let's improve on it, let's do it, and that there's some that hunger for, wow, that was great, we have a rhythm to our life, we have the rhythm, we can count on these things in our community every year, we do this or something like it, or it becomes this thing that we have a lesbian and gay interfaith clergy group that, twice a year we have a gay pride celebration, we have a Thanksgiving celebration, and those are so important, those times where all our communities, Buddhist and Christian, Jewish, come together in different ways and celebrate, are so important that we come to count on them in new ways of articulating our values expressed in our holidays.
And I think part of this issue of rootedness, if you will, is really in some ways what we're talking about, and how the holidays can ground us, or can be a time of great earth-shattering. But it is also in terms of the history of our kind of gay movement. So many of us came from somewhere else to the great urban centers, San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. You came from somewhere else, and there was, as that coming out time, also all kinds of other disconnects in our lives. And so also, as the longer you're in a place, the more roots you put down. And that's true for the movement as well. The institutions that we build, the rhythm of the season, gay pride service, Thanksgiving interfaith service, those same kinds of things are also about the rootedness of our institutional life. And that allows for different kind of celebration, I think, different kinds of transitions in our lives and in our spiritual lives, our celebratory lives as well.
Well, I feel sometimes like people are yearning for more, to be more integrated. And I was thinking, Nancy, when you were talking about the ministers and rabbis and everybody from different faiths, how important it is and feels to get together. I don't think that anyone really wishes there were simply one religion, because then you wouldn't have anything to choose.
That's right.
On the other hand, we do hunger to find that common ground. Just
and
in the way we talk about it, and in celebration. As well.
I think we do it particularly well. There's something about what we've probably been through in terms of our community, that we don't just create a kind of oatmeal mushy service where we do the least common denominator. What words can we all agree on? We bring the fullness of all of our traditions into this, share it and appreciate it. And there's a deep sense of appreciation that is not about just sort of negotiating a bottom line, but it is.
That's not the way it is in the world. I mean,
it isn't. That is precisely, I think, what Nancy's talking about. We have this other shared history together. We have another bond together through our queerness, if you will, that allows us to say, we are going to honor who you are in your fullness. And you're going to sing that hymn from MCC. Well, I read from Hebrew scripture in Hebrew. and allow a Presbyterian to read an English translation of that Hebrew scripture that might not be my English translation as a rabbi. And that, but we have another common bond. And that's what's, I think, that is what's so powerful about when we do come together in our differences, to allow our differences to stand.
And in a way, we create sanctuary that does not exist now in the larger world.
Right.
I mean, I'm struck by Denise's comments about this being a time where we honor peace, and I think about this year, and there's so little of it. There is so much acrimony, so much discontent, so much tension in the world around the elections, around what's going on in the Middle East, around what's going on in Africa, around what's going on, this place and that place. And all of it is happening now. And maybe it's happening for a reason, and maybe it's not. But one of the things that I think happens in our communities at this time of year, because we understand, maybe not any better than other people, but certainly we do understand the need for sanctuary. And so, in fact, we create peace and we create safety for folks' wholeness. And in our churches and in our traditions and in our synagogues.
Well, and I think that the question that I've asked a lot on this show, sometimes when we do our beginning of the millennium, kind of shows, is really what we might have to teach, because people think of us primarily, if they don't know us, as a beleaguered community, and not necessarily, although choosing the word gay should have been some clue to them that we were thinking about celebration here, that we really do, I think, have a great deal to teach, but it's out of an experience of, I think, of oppression.
Right, and humor, I had my godson, when he was 10 years old, every year at MCC, when we have Easter, we have an Easter bonnet contest after church on Easter Sunday, which is outrageous. We have group Easter bonnets. I mean, family Easter bonnets, I mean, the most outrageous, incredible, men, women, children, everybody participates. And my 10-year-old, godson looked at me one day and he said, gay people have more fun in church than anybody, because he goes to another church, straight church, and it's like whoa, boring, and but there's just something about this. How can he explain this? And he had a sense of that joy.
Right. And it is about that joy, because once you're in that sanctuary, Phill, that you talk about, or that harbor, there can be the opportunity to have that pure sense of relief, of the relief of safe haven, and then to really be able to tap into the depths of that overwhelming freedom. Because it's almost as if you can hear, when you finally are in that sanctuary, the chains of oppression breaking. You can feel it. And there's nothing better. There's nothing more glorious than to feel that openness and that freedom at that moment, and that is when we want to celebrate that joy. And in its core, I do think that's what all of these holidays are about, whether you're gay or not. And certainly for Hanukkah, it is not just the Festival of Light, but it literally was celebrating the freedom to worship in the manner in which you wanted, and to break the chains of oppression of an outside group. And that's the core of what that holiday's about.
But it also gives us a challenge. I'll use the word challenge, even though sometimes it's a worse thing than that, in terms of where to go outside the safety of that, because you can't always stay there. And we don't, for the most part, at least certainly the four of us don't stay there. Can you, do you have something you incorporate in your own home, for instance, which should be a safe place as well? And then when you go further, how can you be so filled with love and joy?
I think you can take it with you. And I think that one of the things that our institutions have done for us, and for some of us, the work that we have done for us, is that we found our own okayness through our own labor. And so when you find your okayness through your own effort, you can take it with you everywhere. And so the notion, I mean, if I just own my own experience, the notion of getting to some place, and we all travel in all sorts of different places, getting someplace and to have someone to think that we don't belong because of our race or our gender or our sexual orientation, I think at some point you think, and what's wrong with you? I mean, it certainly gets to the point, can get to the point where you, at least in your core, understand that it is their problem that they have to work on. Now, and I think that is the gift of the sanctuary, and that's the gift of the institutions. But most importantly, that's the gift that we give ourselves through the work we do.
And I find I would go to National Council of Churches meetings, for instance, or the World Council. What happens is when you have that sanctuary inside yourself, I think what you're saying, you know, within you, people are attracted to that. And, you know, so we joke about going, you know, to these places, and people tell you their whole life story, and people are coming out to us or telling us about their children or their families. They're telling us things they never tell each other. They've known people 20 years in these institutions. They cannot feel safe enough to talk to, but they feel safe enough to talk to us, even if it's because they know, you know, how could we possibly judge them because we, you know, we're off the scale or something like that. But also, I just think they have a sense of that sense of, you know, when you have a sense of somebody has worked through and has a sense of safety or sanctuary, and that they can create safe space for you. And I think we kind of go and bring that gift, and it's not always welcomed as a gift, but that's up to them.
Yeah, there's a sort of breakthrough, a safe feeling that you have in yourself. Now, maybe this is an aspect of age as well, because I didn't feel safe in my 20s, no matter what. It wasn't even only about being gay. It was about worrying about what my parents thought of me and what everybody else thought of me. Then in my 30s, it got a little bit better because I would think, well, maybe there's something wrong with them and not so much wrong with me. But still, that need, you know, to be loved, and we find ourselves loved in our community. That's a very interesting thing.
And not needing approval from someone else. Having it the wherewithal within yourself to know how you stand, to know who you are, and I think the interesting dilemma is in our gay and lesbian community, especially when there's so much emphasis, especially in the gay men's community, on youth and looks, that there has to be some time that we honor our elderhood. That we honor those gray hairs. Our maturity, absolutely.
Well, you know, one of the things that I think can happen is that at a certain point, and maybe it has to do with the way I view mortality, but at a certain point you conclude that you have more past than future. You know? And I think what happens at whatever point you conclude that is you determine, well, you know, in balance, what I've done is more than what I'm going to do. And so however I'm going to be judged, it's already set. Okay? Good, bad, or indifferent, it's done. So I might as well cool out.
Well, but I also found that once you get that sense of self, you can bring it into your family, whether they really totally approve of you or not. I mean, in a sense, you can just love the hell out of people.
That's right.
And it is so attractive. I mean, I went into the legislature, the only open person that had ever been there so far. Now, of course, there are 4 of us in the California legislature. But I wasn't feeling defiant necessarily, like, you know, screw you, I'm gay, you know. I was a little bit worried, so I thought, well, I'll just be as funny as I can possibly be, which I try to be anyway. And also, I just felt fine about myself. I just felt, you know, I'm good. What can they tell me? I already know I'm okay. And it is so attractive to people because they wait to see, do you like yourself?
Oh, yes.
And if you do, it's harder for them to dislike you. And certainly that's true of our families.
Absolutely.
And you get to share that with people regardless of their sexual orientation. You get to share with them that, you know, you're okay. You know, and it's difficult for folks to kind of reject you when you're in fact affirming, their essence, by validating your own.
And joy at the holidays. I mean, it's hard to get to sometimes. I'm not trying to be, you know, a Pollyanna. I'm not exactly a Grinch, but I did understand his point of view. It's also infectious at the holidays, you know, that if you can find that little bit of peace, even if you go to the sanctuary to get it, and carry it like, you know,
carry it as a precious
fire.
It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity, really, I think, you know, this time of year. And it's not the only opportunity we have, but it's an opportunity to shift things. I think we could look at our holiday celebrations and chronicle them and see the shift in our lives, you know, and the increasing health or strength or maturity or better choices that people are making. I see that all the time.
And I also think that because of the prevalence of the winter holidays, and that most people celebrate some kind of winter holiday. If you're pagan, there's the winter solstice, you know, whatever it is, that more people are tuned in to these seasonal moments. And that in our very fast-paced world, we're not really tied to the farm anymore. We're not tied to the seasons. We're not tied to the earth in quite the same way. And that it's very easy in these concrete jungles to have such a disconnect to the cycle of the seasons, the natural rhythms of nature, and to these holiday celebrations that we often just kind of scoot over the rest of this year. What other holidays are there? The holiday season. Well, we all know what the holiday season means, you know, from Thanksgiving to New Year's, you know.
Well, it gets dark early.
Right.
You know, that's the solstice, and that's the fear, and that's the sort of kind of depression and needing to think, oh, you know, the days will get longer again, let's celebrate. Of course, it used to be we thought if we did something, we could make the days get longer again, which is why we hung all those gifts on the pine tree, I think. But the sort of rebirth time of the year, which is celebrated by some fairly major religious holidays, still is not a universal celebration because, again, I think your point is well taken. We don't have a connect to planting, to, you know, spring as such, or sort of the rebirth notion, although we do try to celebrate it religiously.
Well, especially in our secularized America. I mean, for those of us that are people of faith, religious people, we do have a rhythm. I mean, there's Passover and Easter comes along, and we have those very strong connections.
But no gifts.
But no.
Well, so what does America care?
Right, exactly. Exactly. That's the point in kind of American secular civil religion. You know, what do we, next is Memorial Day, break out the barbecue, and 4th of July, break out the suntan lotion. I mean, so, you know, and hang the flag out. But you don't have quite the same kind of holiday rhythms and celebrations to it.
Although it's funny when you describe it in that fashion. Once you get through Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, it really is a depressing slide, you know, because you get to
well, you're all invited to my 60th birthday party, February 10th.
Great.
There you go.
There you go.
You're at Easter, where, you know, the crucifixion happens, and then you're at Memorial Day, and it's like, it's this kind of, it's kind of interesting.
I mean, that's kind of, you know, it's kind of funny because Nancy was talking a little bit earlier about, you know, entering high gear into this time. And I always kind of laugh because I always love that Thanksgiving interfaith service that we do every year, because it's really the end of my high season, because I've been through the Jewish high holy days of Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, and the Day of Atonement, and the Sukkot, the Fall Harvest Festival. And I get to Thanksgiving and I go, whew, I'm relieved. And I all know that this is really the most difficult time of the year for Nancy and my Christian minister friends, because after Thanksgiving it begins Advent and the 4 Sundays, and then it's Christmas, and I don't see or talk to them for that time. And everybody says, oh, are you know, what are you doing? You must be so busy. No, actually, I'm really loving this time because I'm done with my holiday rhythms, and I know you're gearing up.
Right, exactly. We sort of see each other at the end of the summer and then winter.
Right, but it's also about part of that rhythm and the uniqueness of that rhythm for each of our traditions.
Well, it's interesting to me, you're all talking about our children and how we have this in common now and traditions we're creating for them, but in terms of the younger people in our community, I wonder what your experience is with their experience of the holidays, if you know, of those you know, because is it different than it was for us?
I mean, we have a young group called The Tribe. It's just young adults in our church, and you know, they're coming out to their parents. They're starting their first serious relationship, maybe. There's a little more seriousness about things like dating, and that I don't remember because it was the 70s and we didn't date, you know, then. We were having sex and we were doing this and that, and we were, you know, living in communes and people, I mean, it was just very, very different. But there's a little more, they seem a little more serious to me than I remember to some degree. Or, you know, they're also dealing with, if they're in West Hollywood, or they're dealing with the, the drug and that culture, and trying to separate, you know, which path do I want to go in my life. But the same pains or issues around with boyfriends and girlfriends and coming out, and, you know, all of this, and how do I individuate from my family, and when do I move out of the house, and, you know, am I, you know, what am I doing career-wise, and you know, all of that you know, identity issues are so strong, and how do I find a place that can become a sanctuary for me in the middle of that, and make good choices for my life.
But are they different in any way around this ability to celebrate, or still worried because each person who comes out may still be rejected by their parents,
Yeah,
may
there's
still,
still a lot of that.
you know, be unable to find a community?
Right.
Pretty much the same?
I think there's a great number of kids who come out high school
They still live at home.
early, they still live at home. The parents learn to be supportive rather quickly compared to others, and so they kind of have a much more natural, they're going to their proms with their
Right.
gay or lesbian, you know, date. I mean, that would have been unheard of
Right.
for all of us. And
Right.
and yet then there's this other extreme of people who are still in very terrible, disheartening situations where they fear for their lives. And so I think it's a very fluid time. I'm not sure we're at the either or yet.
Because I know at my kids' school they have a club called Safe Haven.
Yeah.
And so
Or Gay
clearly
Straight Alliance.
there's
Gay
still
Straight
a
Alliances.
need for that
Right.
kind of
Oh, yeah.
activity.
Yeah, I think.
But it
that's-
becomes a danger even for the straight kids that want to
Yeah.
do that, you know,
Right.
because clearly you wouldn't be aligned with a gay
Right.
person unless you were gay yourself,
Right.
et cetera. And
Well-
I know that, I mean, the hard thing I think for kids is the same thing that's difficult for us when we go home to our parents, maybe not quite at our ages, but a little younger than us, which is you revert. I mean, you're right back to what you were like as a kid. And it's hard to bring that joy that you find in your sanctuary or your safety with you, because you turn into somebody you didn't particularly want to be. I want to be sure that I get to thank you all. This has been really wonderful.
Yes.
And I love the show around this time of year,
Yes.
better than any of my others. Don't tell anybody. Well, you've all been on others
There
too.
you go.
So thank you very,
Yes.
very much, Denise and Phill and Nancy. And thank you for being with us. And if this is actually being run in your city around the holiday time, I hope you have wonderful holidays, and take to heart some of what was said here today, whatever works for you. And I hope that you'll have great joy and peace in your life, and that you're actually able to get used to it.